It is our pleasure to actually welcome and introduce Professor Bruce Hanington from Carnegie Mellon University. I think Professor Hanington is no stranger to the design research community, and it's always a delight to welcome him back. Is Professor Hanington online? Good morning, Bruce.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Before I give the stage over to you, allow me to introduce you to the attendees. Professor Bruce Hanington is Professor and Head of the School of Design. He has fulfilled numerous roles in Carnegie Mellon University School itself in terms of Program Chair of Industrial Design as well as Director of Graduate Studies. He has conducted a vast amount of research, specifically on topics of how people work, research methods for design, and design principles for practices. He is no stranger to any of the international forums for design research, which of course both include IASDR and DRS. He is very well known, and I think all our PhD students already know this because of your prior engagement with our students, for the book you co-edited and co-published called Universal Methods of Design. Bruce also pointed out that the book has now been translated into 3 languages, specifically geared for the Asian market, which I think is Korean, Japanese, and Chinese. In any event, we would like to welcome you and thank you for taking the time in doing the keynote for us. And I hope that we have a very interesting discussion afterwards. The floor is yours. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Gerhard, so much for that generous introduction. I trust everyone can hear me okay? All right. So good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, depending on the time zone from wherever you are enjoying this IASDR conference. First, let me begin by thanking everyone at Hong Kong Polytechnic for hosting this conference and for inviting me to keynote, especially alongside such prestigious company as the other keynote speakers featured in your program and the few that I have enjoyed myself so far. Thank you to Professor KP Lee for this invitation, Gerhard for the introduction, and especially to Shanna Leung for taking such good care of me throughout the process of getting me here tonight. So I'm presenting today with a sense of real optimism for design. I hope what I share with you will provide some insight into what I see as exciting momentum in design across both academia and practice, namely a growing shift towards civic and social design in our profession. So with that, I'm going to share my slide deck, which hopefully you will all be able to see. So hopefully you can all see a title slide there with the title. Perfect. All right, so I will commence first with an overview of the presentation itself. So I want to talk tonight about, of course, as the title suggested, design for civic engagement and social change. And I'm going to begin by talking about what that really means, how we might define that territory of civic engagement and social change so that we can kind of be on the same page where that's concerned. I'm then going to turn my attention to civic and social design in academia, talking about how this realm occurs in teaching and research, particularly featuring some of the work out of my own School of Design at Carnegie Mellon, but referencing others as well. And then turn our attention to civic and social design in professional practice, before then really looking at how we might bridge academia and design practice to make sure that implementation of civic and social design occurs. And then I'll conclude with some opportunities and challenges that I see working in this realm in both academia and design practice. So if we look at civic engagement and social change, I think it's important to kind of lay some definitional boundaries, what that might mean. And 2 lenses that I look at as far as defining this territory are in civic design and policy and in design for social innovation. So if we look at civic design and policy, for example, this really consists of the promotion of new forms of grassroots citizen engagement in community and nonprofits and design practice within public or government institutions. So we're really looking here at engaging decision makers and citizens to develop new practices of well-being that involve rethinking common spaces, health, food systems, transportation, housing, or really any other public sector issue. And we can look at this through two different frames. One is design for civic engagement, which would consist of design promotion of grassroots participation by citizens in things like nonprofits, community organizations, and activist groups. And then the other lens is design for policy and government. And this is where we see design practices emerging within public or government institutions. For example, in public sector innovation labs. So if that handles sort of the civic engagement lens, then in terms of social change, if we look at design for social innovation, which is really the development of new processes, products, services, and policies that meet social needs more effectively than existing market or government solutions, making use of the productive benefits of community relationships and local underutilized assets to address quality of life issues. So social innovation really seeks to create systems-based solutions that enable communities to support themselves in an ongoing way, empowering the capacity of a community to act. And typically what we find is that in this realm, designers work with stakeholders through participatory means to facilitate or catalyze the process of innovation, resulting in new or improved capabilities and relationships that can lead to better use of assets and resources. So it should become apparent to you hearing these definitions that really the roots of these methods lay in participatory design and by extension, participatory action research or PAR. So the foundation in participatory design really is bridging stakeholder, participant, and design expertise and is defined by a human-centered approach advocating active user and stakeholder engagement throughout all phases of the research and design process, and ideally including co-design activities. Whereas participatory action research, related, is a cyclical collaborative research process that seeks to intentionally change the community or other aspects that are the focus of the inquiry. So given these definitions and the foundational roots of methods, what are the summarizing factors that characterize design for civic engagement and social change? Well, first, as I mentioned, there's an emphasis on participatory design expanded to community and civic engagement. It really involves a multidisciplinary approach and collaborations to tackle complex or what's known as wicked problems. There's a rising interest in design applications for social and environmental change and sustainability. And there's a real growth right now of design prominence in business, nonprofit, healthcare, government, and education. And I like to highlight this all-time high of civic interest that's occurring right now using a quote from Victor Ng, who's an alum of our communication design program and also the design and brand strategy director at the Ford Foundation in New York. So Victor points out that design is more integral to our political and civil discourse than ever. He gives examples from the Democratic primary, where we saw numerous top-notch design firms propel Democratic candidates to a national stage, and suggests that designers are asking big questions, no longer content to just design the bumper sticker. They're building the apps, they're building digital organizing tools, creating viral content and more, feeling empowered to challenge existing institutions and systems, and training their gaze on big tech. So often the sharpest criticisms of these companies come from their own employees who openly question the ethics of the decisions made at the top when it comes to defense contracting, political discourse, and online abuse. So if that kind of lays the groundwork and the foundation, the landscape of civic and social design in terms of kind of definitional boundaries and identifying the momentum that's currently underway, I wanted to take first a look at how this is occurring in academia through teaching and research. So some of the evidence I can point to is that many faculty researchers and many of our new hires, young designers, and even seasoned professionals who are pivoting their careers are motivated to leverage their design thinking and skills to catalyze positive change in the world. Undergraduate students are motivated toward meaningful careers that make a difference, and graduate students are coming increasingly from civic and social sector work, or they're motivated to pivot traditional design careers towards social change through advanced study. And our PhD students are seeking a depth of investigation and research to advance significant and environmental change through design. So our own model of teaching and research in the School of Design at CMU is based on design for interactions, mediated by artifacts such as products, communications, and environments that really define our undergraduate tracks, with a focus on social innovation, service and transition design, and all design situated in the context of the natural world. So research and teaching within the school investigates design for interactions as an agent of change and explores the ways in which people conceive, plan, and script behaviors. We study how new technologies restructure our everyday practices and conceive of ways in which society can live and work sustainably and equitably. So what does our actual curriculum and some of the coursework look like? In addition to thematic studios that are largely based around social inquiry and design for social change, we have explicit courses in design for social innovation, design for services, transition design, the PhD program in transition design, and then a thread through our undergraduate curriculum called Design Studies, consisting of 8 courses with the titles Place, Histories, Futures, Experience, Systems, Cultures, Persuasion, and Power. And I'm just going to briefly touch on each of these courses. So this Design for Social Innovation seminar is a seminar that traces the history and application of design methods to solving social problems, where students learn the role of governments, technology, funding, infrastructure, mindset, emotion, and cultural factors in addressing problems in the social sector, largely predicated on a desire to create a positive impact in the world. Now, one of the interesting features of this course is it is taught by one of our adjunct faculty members, Arthi Krishnaswamy, who, as well as being an alum of our CMU Master of Design program, is the founder of something called the Community Success Institute. And this institute is a not-for-profit organization whose mission is to improve educational outcomes for students living in at-risk and underserved communities in the United States. So Arthi was really well positioned with her work to deliver this course in Design for Social Innovation. The Service Design Seminar, I think service design is familiar to most of us in this audience, but service design is basically a systems perspective, allowing designers to tackle complexity by seeing service as a series of interconnected touch points, stakeholders, artifacts, technologies, environments, interactions, and processes within a human-centered mindset. The Transition Design Seminar is based on a newer field of inquiry, really developed through faculty members at CMU in collaboration with several others elsewhere, based on design for systems level change, addressing large-scale problems to catalyze societal transition toward more sustainable and desirable futures. The Transition Design Framework that basically provides the structure of the seminar and much of the work that takes place within transition design brings together a body of knowledge and skill sets in 4 key areas that are relevant to design for systems level change. These mutually reinforcing and co-evolving areas of knowledge, action, and self-reflection include visions for transition, theories of change, posture and mindset, and new ways of designing. I mentioned we have a PhD in transition design. Currently, that program enrolls 20 researchers and teaching fellows from diverse backgrounds and around the world. And this program is really for people committed to making a positive change. The program develops future design leaders with the capacity to envision and realize purposeful change across a range of complex problems, including food, water, materials and products, policy, culture, economy, cities, and social movements. And there's a brief list of some of the current research projects that are currently underway with our PhD researchers. And I wanted to point out an interesting development with some of our PhD cohort who have put together a bilingual podcast called Design in Transition. And this is really about designing for systems level change toward more sustainable and equitable futures corresponding to the transition design framework. It also provides a space to talk about the transitions that design is taking in practice when it's concerned with the complex and interconnected challenges that societies face today. So a real credit to our PhD students for putting that together, and I invite any of you to subscribe to their podcast. And then lastly, I mentioned that in our undergraduate curriculum, we have this design studies thread. So again, this is a series of 8 half-semester courses required of our undergraduates that examines theoretical aspects of design and provokes inquiry into the cultural, political, and ecological conditions it shapes and is itself shaped by. So a number of methods and approaches are used in our teaching and research, some of which are tried and true with a long history of established success, and others which are more newly developed, and many that are specifically oriented toward design for civic engagement and social change. So for example, using foresight methods in transition design, backcasting drives conditions of the present toward long-term desired futures, leveraging projects linked to co-created short and midterm visions, steps along a transition pathway, with the long-term vision serving as a magnet for stakeholders and a compass to guide the projects that are underway. Now, it's important to point out that while there's a lot of momentum, and I'm of course biased in singing the praises of our own school, there's a lot of this work, thankfully, taking place in a number of institutions around the United States and really around the world. So for example, School of Visual Arts, SVA in New York City, has an MFA in Design for Social Innovation and an MFA in Products of Design that uses systems design, critical thinking, and imagination to move people to become more resilient and resourceful. And acknowledging the increased interest in the power of design to fix problems, create value, reinvent businesses, and to address vital social and environmental challenges. In their courses, SVA faculty address the urgent need to reconcile the material, energy, environmental, and cultural consequences of design inherent within user production and consumption. Likewise, at the Maryland Institute College of Art, or MICA, they have programs in ecosystems, sustainability and justice, sustainability and social practice, and an MA in social design. And their Center for Social Design is dedicated to demonstrating and promoting the value of design in advancing equity and social justice, and to inspiring and preparing the next generation of creative change makers. And of course, right here at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, they have a BA in social design in their senior year, a Master of Design in Transitional Environments Design, and engage in PhD research in social design, with a program that really attempts to expand the scope of design beyond the current commercialized and compartmentalized professional practices by orienting towards the social dimension of design, with an emphasis on civic participation, social engagement, and collaborative design practices, and dedicated to the promotion of social and cultural sustainability, focused on the realization of social innovations and civic goals through the framework of design thinking and solution prototyping. It's also great to see a number of institutional collaborations taking place, and this has occurring at a global scale. So for example, one of our own faculty members, Peter Scupelli, who is here attending the conference and presented a paper last night, has developed a Design Futures course. And this curriculum, and by the way, the X in Design Futures is a hybrid of design thinking and futures thinking. And he has created this curriculum and intentionally positioned it as open source to provide materials so that others can learn to design futures and teach the methods involved in aligning near-term design action with sustainable futures. Now, one of the remarkable things about the global reach of this open source curriculum that Peter has developed is that components of it have already been taught at Polytechnico di Milano. Peter himself is delivering it to the CMU Qatar campus. Aspects of it have been used at Georgia Tech. And most recently, the course has been translated to Chinese at Tsinghua University. So we're very excited about these developments under Peter's guidance. And then, I don't know about you, but I was quite gratified to see some of the Rethinking Design Education initiative that Donald Norman featured in his talk the other night, outlining big sweeping changes that many people have their eyes focused on the future of design education. And again, these initiatives are recognizing the power of design received as greater attention from industry, government, and society, and the opportunities that emerge while challenging designers to a different kind of education to address these issues. And again, some of these same sentiments echoed as far as a priority advocating for social and environmental responsibility in the way that we educate our young designers. I think it's also important to point out that as much as this is taking place on a global scale, and as much as there's a large momentum behind design for civic engagement and social change right now, it's not entirely new. So again, I'll reference another one of my fellow keynotes. Rachel Cooper, in her talk earlier, talked about the work that she has really pioneered over many, many years, even prior to her conceiving of the Imagination Lancaster Lab in 2007. So this kind of work that, for example, addresses real-world issues, challenges boundaries, looks at design-led research that transforms people, products, and places and policy for the better, has been around for quite a while. And it's just rewarding to see now that we're really on another cusp of momentum. But I really enjoyed Rachel's talk, and I'm sure all of you did too. And I highly recommend referencing the paper that talks about the sort of history of Imagination Lancaster in the title referenced on screen there, Imagination Lancaster, Open-Ended, Anti-Disciplinary, and Diverse, which was published by Shiji in 2018. So if this sort of lays some of the landscape of what's happening in academia, I wanted to turn the next section of the talk to what's happening in professional practice where civic and social design is taking place. So just as in academia, in practice, there's evidence of change in the expansion of civic and social design occurring here. Design in government and social sector, nonprofit, healthcare, and education is on the rise. And there are companies, corporations, and organizations dedicated to social change through design. So for example, in government, we see labs such as the lab at the Office of Personnel Management in the United States and in the Canadian Digital Service in Canada. And some of the remarkable features of the staffing of the Canadian division is that there is, in addition to head of client experience, 4 design researchers and 12 designers, which is quite remarkable in government. In addition to design in government, there's evidence of design for government, such as the Detroit, Michigan-based organization called Sevilla, which is a nonprofit design studio dedicated to changing the way our public serving institutions work. In education, once again, I'm featuring the same woman who is the co-founder, founder of the Community Success Institute and teaches our Design for Social Innovation course. So Arthi Krishnaswamy is also the founder and CEO of Rycatcher, which is an online collaboration software that makes it easy for everyone involved in a student's success to work together. The students using Rycatcher determine the kinds of support each student needs and create a circle of support designed just for that student and monitor and measure the outcome of that support. And Arthi has been very generous in working with our school as far as collaborative projects, as well as providing fellowships to some of our students over the summer months to work directly at Rycatcher. In the realm of healthcare, one of our local examples comes from the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center that has a large enterprises division really dedicated to transforming healthcare through science and technology, and I would say design. They have two large design divisions, and I'm proud to say that many of the staff of those divisions are from our design alumni pool, including Gretchen and Katie, who have both risen to the rank of Vice President of UPMC Enterprises, Gretchen being from our Master of Design program and Katie being from our Industrial Design undergraduate, coupled with a Master of Human-Computer Interaction, also from CMU. Again, in healthcare, we see evidence of design existing even in the Mayo Clinic in their Knowledge and Evaluation Research Unit laboratory. They too have engaged a number of our students, both for internships and career positions. And I'm quite pleased to feature Ian Hargraves in this realm. Ian is an alum of our Master of Design and our PhD program and has risen to the rank of Assistant Professor of Medicine. So I just think that's really, really a remarkable thing that we have someone with design credentials who is a faculty member at the Mayo Clinic and has been positioned as an assistant professor of medicine. I think that's a real testament to the credibility and the growing credibility of design across disciplines. And then at the corporate level, we're seeing evidence of civic engagement and social change in various organizations and corporations. And two such examples are Blue State Digital, which has a tagline of believe in the power of people, moving people to do things like elect presidents, change laws, fall in love with brands, donate dollars, and more. And they are really advocates for grassroots mobilization, and we have a number of students who work with them as well. Likewise, the company Substantial, with a very optimistic outlook on design and technical excellence, believing in the unmatched potential of design and technology to transform our world, seeing a beautiful future ahead, a place where insights, imagination, design, and technology conspire to deliver valuable and inclusive experiences, not just for customers, but for community and for society at large. So I presented sort of the academic landscape and the professional practice landscape. I want to talk a little bit about just how academia and practice comes together, because as Rachel Cooper pointed out in her talk the other day, no innovation occurs without implementation. So how do we bridge this civic and social design in academia and professional design practice? There's various ways that that can occur. So for one, there are research collaborations and sponsored studio projects that take place. There's the whole notion of executive education or professional education. There's faculty research and community outreach, including that occurs with outside partners. Documenting and promoting non-traditional career paths through the social sector, and alumni mentoring. So for example, our faculty who head up our transition design research for systems change, in 2020 and 2021 alone, they were invited to deliver approximately 27 lectures. They conducted 8 workshops. They did a one week-long course. And they have been in conversations with approximately 20 different organizations, from education, nonprofit, B Corps, design firms, and large business consulting firms who are really showing an interest in systems thinking and the ability to address complex problems in their organizations. And much of that initiative is coming from employee pressure to align personal values with their work. So for example, the transition design approach is seen here being tested in an engagement with the city of Ojai, California, with local residents and business owners, the mayor and city council, to address the problem of severe water shortage as a decades-long transition toward water security. Workshop participants mapped the wicked problem of water shortage to achieve a shared understanding and co-create visions of desirable long-term futures for the city of Ojai. And just as a side note, if there's any silver lining to the pandemic, it's that we have really gained a savviness in working with remote research engagements. And as a result of that, we've really been able to engage a diverse and global participant population, leveraging the multiple remote tool applications for design workshops. Other examples of bridging academia and practice take place in our collaborative course sponsorships. So Peter Scupelli recently worked with the Index Project, which really is an organization that pushes the boundaries of design for good by focusing on design that solves real needs in our society, or what they call design to improve life. The Index Project mission is to promote and mobilize design to improve life through their Index Award, their education programs, and their impact investment funds. Now, one of the teams that was working with Peter on the Index Project collaborative project wanted to explore how looking at the end of life can open up opportunities to live more mindfully and sustainably in the present and contribute to an improved future beyond life. They discovered that only 1 in 3 adults in the US have made plans for their end of life proceedings or have spoken even to a loved one about their wishes. And they wanted to design something to motivate and mobilize individuals to prepare for the unexpected. And they came up with Life Kit, an app that basically celebrates life moments and prepares for the future. It's a mobile intervention that makes planning for emergencies and mortality more approachable, streamlined, and easy to work on. And in addition to high praise from the Index Project personnel on this project, Life Kit also, I'm very proud to say, won the Core 77 2021 Design Award for Consumer Technology. And then finally, much of the research and creative practice of our faculty members involves things like community outreach. So Professor Kristen Hughes, for example, has done a number of projects with outreach to the local Pittsburgh community and really empowered people, particularly in disadvantaged communities, to inspire the youth and occupants of those communities to be empowered to make change in their own lives. So Night Owl Bakers is one of those projects that Kristen initiated, which is a life readiness program for young adults living in chronic poverty and encountering gross educational disparities that combines food science with 21st century skills to promote societal and mental well-being. And then finally, we have a project now where we're looking at the career placements of our graduates and alumni, and we're really trying to bolster the roster of different non-traditional design careers through which our students explore their opportunities once they graduate. So I've mentioned some of these in the previous slides of the presentation, but things like a service designer, a researcher at the Mayo Clinic, design director of the Ford Foundation, founders of organizations like Conscience Forum and Ryecatcher and the Community Success Institute, the director of the Patient Revolution, managing director at University Hospitals, various design positions at Blue State Digital, principal service designer at Substantial, freelancers working in the area of global health and welfare, and even some curators at museums. And then the other aspect of this is to engage our alumni in mentoring our current students so that they can see the through line of where they might end up in non-traditional design careers to take advantage of the kinds of socially meaningful projects that they engage in their studies and what the opportunities might be to continue that work in the field after graduation. So a few summarizing points. I believe there's a lot of opportunities still taking place in civic and social design. There's a continued and increased prominence of design in various new sectors, including those I've mentioned in this presentation, healthcare, education, government, and nonprofit sectors. There's a continued demand for design input to tackle complex social and systems problems, and we're seeing a lot of prominence where that is concerned. There's a continued expansion in creativity and development of new methods and approaches to help get us there. And there's certainly new opportunities emerging and developing for remote research and design engagement through many of the tools that have been developed, particularly as a response to the pandemic. However, despite this optimism and the opportunities that are there, we have to recognize some of the challenges that we face. While many students are motivated and directed toward design for civic engagement and social changes, some are not, and all are rightfully concerned about acquiring the skills and knowledge to make them readily and gainfully employable. So how do we find this balance of orienting our programs toward meaningful change while still providing a fundamental design education that skills students for employment? We also recognize that not all companies are receptive to change, and designers are challenged to find ways of making an impact. And there was quite a robust conversation during Donald Norman's talk on this very topic, which I found really interesting. And then finally, how does this momentum occur in other contexts and countries beyond the largely Western US perspective that I have presented here tonight? So I'm very interested in engaging with those of you in the audience and from other countries and academic institutions and design professions to understand if this is unique or quite widespread in other parts of the world and other contexts and countries, and if so, how this interest in civic engagement and social change might be occurring in other cultures. So I started this presentation by saying I'm presenting with a very optimistic outlook for design, and I want to end on that same optimistic note. I really believe that the growing demand for design and its new prominence in unique and varied sectors has inspired an array of creative approaches, including social innovation, service design, civic design and policy, and transition design, that require a diversity of methods to actively engage stakeholders participating in design for civic engagement and social change for the creation of desired and sustainable futures. Thank you. With that, I'll end my talk and look forward to questions, answers, and discussion.
Thank you, Bruce. Right. I think very interesting questions being raised, also very important points. Also specific to, of course, the Hong Kong Polytechnic's School of Design. But right, let's open the floor for any questions. Maybe start with questions from the floor. Do you have a mic?
Hi, Bruce. Thank you for your presentation. And I have a question. You mentioned about design for civic and social design. So when considering the academia and practice, like you talked about how can there be a collaboration between academia and practice, and then there is, like you also mentioned about that there is an opportunity where, you know, you talked about design for government. So how do you think, or maybe how easy or difficult is it for a designer to make an impact within that government environment? Like the formal, fixed environment, which is very structured.
Right. So again, I'm, you know, where we're talking with government, my response will be very sort of particular to the local and American context. So I'm curious to hear how it might happen in other cultures and contexts. But I guess there's a few things I could point to. In practice, as I featured, there's a number of labs that are emerging within government organizations. So there's a certain appetite and reception to design making government work better. So that's one place where I'm quite impressed to see, even in some of the most conservative government years in the United States, the lab at OPM was quite a thriving entity. And they worked on everything from improving veteran services to tax forms, to just the administrative organizational structure as a whole. They said that that lab trained many people throughout government on the use of user journey maps, and suddenly every division of government had user journey maps everywhere. So that was quite interesting and I guess rewarding in a certain way for them to see. And then there are certainly a lot of designers who are interested in advocating for citizen grassroots initiatives and change, sort of from outside of government. That's sort of a different entity in the kind of civic engagement realm. And then I think the other way that we can help bridge that, as well as having designers work in government or working for citizen advocacy, is to do an increasing number of collaborative projects. So one of our other faculty members has been engaging government at the county level, sort of a more kind of regional government, and initiated projects with them to look at things like healthcare, adoption, smoking cessation, many of that government, largely healthcare related health and well-being initiatives that the government wanted to see unfold. And they worked with our faculty and students to see how that might be, how some of those problems might be tackled by design. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. And again, I apologize that, my lens is sort of quite local and national with a Western bias. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but I'd be very interested also to hear how these things might occur in other forms of government, especially since government is something that varies so widely around the globe.
Kriti is nodding. She says, yes, you've addressed the question. Before we go on with other questions, I have a question related to maybe tying together what you said before, as well as the question that was just asked. With all these multi-party individuals around a common table, how do you manage to find a common language between all these perspectives? Is there a certain way of, I don't know, method of allowing people to talk about things in another way? Is it a language that you'd have to develop at that moment? Is it something that is maybe directed a little bit beforehand? I mean, because in all these social innovation projects, the real question is, everyone has to somehow come to a consensus and reach some level of understanding, or even if there's no understanding, then at least an agreed sense of difference. But how do you get to that common language?
Yeah, so I would really give a lot of credit to Terry Irwin and Gideon Kossoff, who I featured in some of those transition design workshops, because they faced that exact challenge. So you're bringing together people that are concerned with water shortage, for example, in the Ojai project that I mentioned. So you have politicians who may have certain agendas. You have landowners who may have certain agendas. You have corporations that may have very different agendas. You might have people who are affected by the decision but don't live on the land, where water sources occur, that might have very competing agendas. So I think one of the things that they do is they first let everybody be heard. So I think that, allowing all voices to be present on the table, and even if they differ, and then when they begin mapping the problems and the issues, eventually they move toward what could be a shared vision. And then once you have that shared vision of a future, you can use that almost as they talk about a sort of like a magnet or a compass, so that people are kind of focused on where they're headed, as opposed to kind of the problems in the more immediate. So it is kind of I think a challenging process, but I would say sort of the two key features are letting everybody be heard and let everybody have their problems shared and their sort of their moment, and then gradually, and it doesn't always take place in hours, it can take days or weeks depending on the sort of like time span of the project, but eventually moving people towards kind of a common goal or a common vision, I think is really key to the success behind some of these initiatives.
So basically, in addressing one problem, you can also say it's everyone has to share their own problems in order to get to a problem.
Yes, I would say so, yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, so thank you. I'm working on social design, and we know it's very important to engage with the social and produce a product as like social. But for the people who in the manage level or who give the money, it might be quite difficult to measure the result compared with the tangible products. So it's like, okay, so what do you in the end produce? The social, like civic engagement, but what kind of measurable results, it's very difficult to see. So it's kind of challenging to get money and convince people, especially from the engineering background. Do you have any advice on that? Thank you.
Right. So I think this is part of the interesting conversation that emerged and Donald presented the other day. And sorry, I'm getting a bit of echo on my audio here. So yes, I think that depending on the nature of the project or whatever the problem is that you're tackling, sometimes you have to kind of speak the language of certain stakeholders, and some of those may be those who have more of an eye on profit. Don Norman used the example of convincing somebody, for example, with environmental pollutants, that they were basically wasting their money. Their money was literally going, into the muddy waters and the soiled air. So capturing like how that could actually be put in financial terms to be sold to people that were more business minded. I think the other way is to look at how social impact can be measured. So there are changes that can be made in terms of how people live, in terms of their health and well-being, in terms of healthcare. So for example, if you have a project that's oriented toward people's self-care and health and well-being, and their medical costs go down, or they are taking fewer trips to the clinics and hospitals, there's something that's a social change that is measurable, and it's a tangible measurement. Likewise, if you are intervening in education, if you are seeing an improvement in scholastic records of students, or if you are seeing fewer dropout rates or better attendance, better test scores, things like that. So sometimes there are measurable outputs that are connected to social change that is made by design.
Is it good? Thank you. Then we have questions from the online audience as well. I'm going to jump between the online and in situ audience, if that's okay. The first question is, where do you see the opportunity, or if there is, to foster social change through big corporations? Can design play a bigger role beyond educating professional designers?
Yeah, so that's probably our biggest challenge. So, and we teach a lot about social design and civic engagement and social change. And then many of our students, partly because, they, in fairness, they also need to make money and pay off their student loans, they go and work for big tech. And some of these companies, they have they may have a social core or a social agenda, but many do not. And sometimes our students find themselves quite frustrated, working for these, tech giants where they feel like they can't make much impact. We had sort of a joking remark at one point that we saw our students sort of as Trojan horses. If they could get into these organizations and sort of seed change from within. Now, whether or not that's realistic in a big corporation, remains to be seen. But I think that there is something to be said for that. So people that have the training, they have the education, and they have the initiative to foster social change. And when they enter organizations, they can begin to initiate or breed some of that sentiment and possibly inspire others to action and make change within an organization. Truthfully, some of them end up leaving those organizations so that they can, practice their trade elsewhere where they make more impact. But I'm optimistic also that many companies and corporations are seeing the value in change. So back to one of the earlier questions, the notion of making adaptations or organizational change predicated on things like social and environmental sustainability is not necessarily a profit-losing venture. It's often profit-making. So I think looking at things like triple bottom line and other aspects of, what makes a company viable or an organization profitable, I think that the indicators of those are changing radically.
Maybe a follow-up question to that, which I think is quite pressing for the time that we're all living in. And it's actually a question that comes from the same participant. It reads, interesting you mention the non-Western side. When design enters the realm of social change with plural mentality, how do you see design interact with politics and ideology?
Yes. So one of the things that we, sort of have discouraged, and I think this will come as no surprise, is, at one point, I think when in the early era of social design, I think there was a lot of interest in going to other countries and sort of like solving problems elsewhere. And I think that, there's obviously some inherent problems with that. So that sort of notion of, to use an outdated term, that, sort of helicopter design where, you fly in, you solve problems without really knowing or understanding or living that context, and then sort of remove yourself. So sort of the outside expert. So I think where most of our impact has been, it has been working kind of within cultures or within a context, often in our own backyards or in a local context where you can understand and relate to the problem, and where your ideology may be different, but you at least have some appreciation for the context in which you're working. I think that for people that do international work, there's a certain amount of training that has to take place that may be outside the realm of design. So understanding what it means to do development work and provide meaningful international interventions, particularly if you are working in a different culture. But generally speaking, I think that more success has been had where people are working, kind of within a context that has some familiarity with their own work.
Right. Any questions from the floor? Yes. A PhD student.
Hi. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's very interesting, and also what's clear now from the discussion, that there's this very wide range of things that design can work with and for. And you interpret that in a way, in a very optimistic way, I think, that you say the interest in design is growing, but you could, of course, also take a more pessimistic way of seeing this and say that, okay, design has no idea where it's going, and design basically caters to everything that we can think of, and design works for everyone who gives money, right? So my question would be a bit, for you in your role at Carnegie Mellon, how do you curate all this work that you're showing, and a bit how do you decide what's in and what's out? Because of course we all want to be interdisciplinary and we all want to be holistic, but there has to be an end to this somewhere, right? Thanks.
Yeah. Are you asking, I'm trying to understand your notion of sort of curating the work. You mean within the work that we're doing, what I'm showing, or what is the actual type of work that we curate in terms of what projects we'll work on and what we will not work on?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure you as a professor, people come to you all the time, right? And say, we want to do this and this and this project, and we want funding for these things. And you kind of, in your role, you have to decide, okay, is this really worth to be explored from a design perspective? Or are there also things where you say, no, I mean, this is really too much, too big, too whatever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a negotiation, and some of the projects are sought out by our faculty and our students, and others come to us. I would say that something we don't do is essentially work for hire. So if someone comes to us and they want basically student labor to explore, kind of a finite or very, very specific commercial project, we don't typically engage in those. So that is one thing that we generally say no to. So usually what we are working on or looking for collaborative sponsors to take on with us are broad open-ended problems, first of all. So whether or not they have a social touch point or environmental touch point, that's something that's preferable. But we do work in the commercial sector too, but they usually have to be very broad open-ended problems, not something that's sort of like very specific and predefined in terms of what it is that the student or faculty member will be designing. So we're exploring things in a very open-ended fashion. I can't think of anything offhand that has been presented to us, other than these, sort of like work for hire arrangements where we feel like they're potentially looking at the abuse of students for cheap labor. I can't think of anything where something has come to us that's kind of, thematically offensive or problematic that we had turned down because of the sort of nature of the subject. I think we also, it's incumbent upon us to position the school and the university in such a way that people know and understand the types of projects that we are, upon which our reputation is built. So they look to the expertise of our faculty and the kinds of courses and the work product that is the output of our students and faculty. So that by and large identifies the kinds of work that we do and helps to kind of, I think, curate the work, as you mentioned it, in terms of people attracted to that we might seek out or organizations that we might choose to collaborate with.
I get a thumbs up saying that's great, thank you. Then our Dean, Professor Lee, has a question as well.
Hello. Okay.
Hello, KP.
Yeah, I think I think my question is related to previous question, perhaps also that with the Gerhard question. In the past, let's say automobile design, okay? No other non-designers can even think about, automobile design except designers, which has a strong, our expertise in vertical sense. But if we see that social design and design thinking, that scope is getting large, so that non-designers, they claim that I do this or I do this, okay? Which is good, okay? So that, all non-designers, non-design experts, they can become talking about design thinking, social design, and policy design all together. But in terms of design, the discipline, it is good to maintaining that spreading out our competence to all the non-designers. But at the same time, we need to really clarify where is our profession, where is our strong, unique core competency of that social design. How can we manage that, that horizontal axis and the vertical axis, so that we design profession really keep strong as a unique expertise? Thank you.
So in our graduate programs, one of the things that we do is we have a feeder program, the Master of Arts in Design, that is specifically designed for people from outside of design. So it's a one-year intensive, and we attract people from various professions. They come from anthropology and business and chemistry and engineering, English, teaching, journalism, and they go through this program, and then they begin to work and collaborate with designers so that they develop a certain level of design expertise, yet they're still bringing the perspective that they have from their original backgrounds. So I think that's one way to see how design expertise is coupled with other professions and other forms of expertise within collaborative teams, and also within individuals who are kind of these, hybrid models of of backgrounds. But I agree with you that, you know, despite sort of, you know, the Herb Simon definition that, you know, everyone designs, I think that there, you know, there is something to be said for kind of maintaining not really a territory, but claiming what defines our expertise. And I think some of that comes down to the skill sets that are provided in education and in practice, that despite the broad thinking that comes from collaboration with other disciplines and from people that enter into design from other backgrounds, I think that when it comes down to some of the skilling, you know, the like visualizing, presenting, you know, visual articulation of ideas, some of those things, I think that there are certain skill sets that kind of identify designers as unique. But I guess, you know, I guess it's an open question, like sort of like how territorial you want to define those boundaries of design. And I think that we take quite an open-ended approach, particularly with the, you know, with our programs based on these various backgrounds through which people enter into design.
I mean, it is interesting because I know UTS in Sydney has recently started a faculty of transdisciplinary research, something in that line. And I never thought a university would actually promote a faculty that just is open to all these different voices coming together. So it's actually quite interesting. There's a question from the online audience, which is quite funny because it says, please ask, and highlighted in red, so I cannot ask it. But it's, you know, the $1 million question in all of this is usually the $1 million question. So, funding is always needed for social design with the government. Please let us know if there are any successful methods or innovations for obtaining budget in your practice. And maybe we need a whole different conference or another congress for this, but maybe some insight into that would be great.
Yeah. So I will say that, you know, we talk a lot about sponsored projects, but yes, doing a sponsored project with, you know, Microsoft or, you know, Apple or, you know, Ford is very different than doing a sponsored project with, you know, our county government or an environmental charter school or Ryecatcher Education. Or even the Index project, where there's typically kind of no exchange of money, you know, versus the corporate sponsors that typically give us, you know, money or, you know, gifts in kind. So there are faculty who are working in this realm, and some of their funding comes through grants, and they leverage foundations. So again, you know, this is, you know, maybe unique to the American or North American context, but they have successfully applied for and got grants through some of the foundations. So like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Heinz Foundation, some of these local, some of them regional, some of them national. So that's one way to do funding. That's kind of more on kind of a project by project basis. Other than that, I think Gerhard's right that, you know, this could sort of be like, you know, the long subject of almost a separate conference. But it is challenging, but there are ways of being resourceful.
But Bruce, it sounds to me there's two models you've outlined here when it comes to funding certain initiatives, and correct me if I'm wrong. It reads as one model goes into these big corporations and say, look, we're going to do this. One specific project and it'll have these outcomes, so give us money. But it also sounds to me like you are partnering, or what you set up is a partnership between alumni that leave, start up something independently, and then feed it back into the educational system or into the faculty work. Am I misreading it? But it sounds to me like they're forming smaller satellites and then feeding it back into the system. Is that, can I read it like that?
Yes, I mean, I think there certainly are examples of that as well. So, so I'm not sure if you're referencing, so the woman I mentioned that has the Community Success Institute and the Rye Catcher, I mean, she has found a way to make those ventures business profitable. I don't think she's, living high on the hog, as they say, but I think she's, she does well for herself. And then in turn, she comes back and does, she teaches for us, for pay, obviously. She has brought in fellows, summer fellowships, providing, employment to our students in exchange for the experience that they have. And she has done collaborative projects with us. So that is sort of kind of an example of that kind of cyclical work.
Okay. Another question, online question is, do you find that the lack of shared language and vocabulary of designers in non-traditional career paths, both in practice and academia, make it difficult to track the impact, the impact design is having? Do you have a possible solution or even advice?
So are you talking about the lack of shared language between people in traditional and non-traditional career paths? Is that sort of
I think so, yes. I think it alludes to that.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it makes a difference in, because I think that these are, they're operating in very different spheres. So there might be different measures of impact, but I think that they are, I think they're having an impact nonetheless. So if you look at some of these companies like Blue State Digital or Substantial, that I mentioned as two examples, they are definitely working in the social sphere, but I think that ultimately they may have a different accountability or a different measure of impact, versus a Microsoft or a tech firm. But I'm not so sure that they're incompatible. I think that they're just different. I don't think I'm doing a good job of answering this question because I'm not sure I fully understand exactly what.
Yeah, I think it comes back to the shared frameworks and how you can actually assess if something has worked or not. And because maybe it also deals with, if practice looks at it one way, academia looks at it another way, corporations look at it a different way, individuals might have a different, yet again, a different perspective. How do we know where the impact lies, in what realm? So it might be a shifting assessment, a shifting type of value set, but I think it goes to that type of issue. And maybe there is no response to that. I mean, this is maybe something we can think about.
Yeah. I mean, I know that in some of the projects we do, I mean, part of the benefit of sort of collaborations between academia and industry, and and I using the term industry broadly, whether that's sort of a social sector partner, government partner, or a more traditional corporate partner, is that they can, there actually becomes somewhat of a shared language between academia and industry, or between practice and education, so that people can sort of gain a shared understanding, and that some of that kind of measurement of, I don't even know if I'd call it measurement, but kind of assessment of impact may be seen in different terms. The other thing that I will say is, like, on the academic front, there's not always, sometimes there is just an experiential educational component to it. So some of the projects are not necessarily based on, a tangible or measurable impact or outcome. These are just, I would say partially exercises, but also explorations and just ways of tackling design problems, not necessarily reaching the level of kind of a formal assessment of impact.
Right.
Now, where some of those projects are research projects or longer term projects, sometimes with funding, they are sometimes accountable for measuring some of that impact. And in some cases, so Kristen Hughes, one of our faculty members that does a lot of community outreach projects, she has actually partnered with people who are expert in evaluation of social impact and outcomes. So people who are more like, versed in the fields of, statistics and measurement to see how things might be evaluated.
Right. Then we have a question from the School of Design's faculty.
Hi, is it on?
It's on.
I think I have actually a kind of a different way to put that same question, because I'm interested in it as well. I think the idea of documenting alternative careers is a really important one. And I guess another way I could put that same question is, have you seen any movement from organizations like the AIA, AIGA, NCARB, or these professional certification organizations that show movement in what they expect from design professionals because of documentation of these careers? I think when we talk about the question of language that can kind of make sense of the value of these things, I think that's where a lot of that would kind of come out, is in, is the AIA talking with you about its definition of public safety and welfare and how that relates to the work that you're doing with these new kinds of research and projects? Thanks.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And actually, I think that the organizations, now I'm not as familiar with AIA, but organizations like the IDSA, AIGA, SEGD, IXDA in the States, I think they have been actually quite slow to respond on this front. And I think that, unfortunately, as a result, some of these organizations are undergoing kind of an identity crisis for many reasons. I think that they are not quite being disregarded, but their relevance is being questioned. And I think that part of it is their kind of failure to respond to some of these issues. I know that some of them are making, kind of tentative steps in the areas of things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. But as far as kind of like what constitutes kind of the credibility of the professions and the realms in which they work, I think that it's failing to recognize some of these, non-traditional career paths and where design is having an impact in kind of the less traditional careers. So I think there's I would say in the organizations in the US, at least the handful that I mentioned, I think there's some tepid movement, but I think they're slow to respond. And I think it's a really critical factor. I think that your suggestion that they could help move the needle, if I'm reading it correctly, I think that's a really important point.
Thank you. I've been given the 3-minute mark, so maybe one more question from King.
Hi. I have a very practical question, actually. For the undergrad students who did not really have this real life or real world experience, how do you teach them system thinking and all the complexities of what you have talked about?
Right. Yeah, so in the undergraduate curriculum, fortunately, we have a little bit more time with them because they're with us for 4 years. So we start slow, but there is an introduction in a kind of more lecture seminar format in a course called Systems. It builds slowly throughout the curriculum. And, frankly, in the first year studio, for example, they're not exactly tackling like large societal issues, because a part of what their education is at that level is, just fundamental skilling. But we do introduce, sort of the notion of like designing for others, community engagement, outward thinking and outward research. And then it sort of builds slowly and is cumulative. And some of it is enacted in seminar delivery or sort of lecture courses, but then it is translated eventually, especially as they reach their senior year or their 4th year if they're undergraduate, into project work. And much of that is collaborative work. And so by the 4th year, they might actually be engaging in a community project with a sponsor or a client or, external project partner. But yeah, that's all I can say is that it's, it's a slow build, it's iterative, and it takes a lot of reinforcement. And some of them gravitate to it early on, and some of them are, incredibly savvy at figuring it out, and others, kind of lack the interest, and may not be as interested in it. But I would say in large part, we have a fair amount of success with our undergrads. They're incredibly bright and keen young people to tackle some of these problems. And if you give them something meaningful and provide kind of enough infrastructure for them to sink their teeth into it, they do some remarkable work. But it does take some reinforcement and iteration throughout the 4 years.
It sounds to me also that as if your program or what you talk about basically eradicates an understanding of the individual as being, or you studying something just to do something, but actually the program sounds as if it's saying, well, if you want to do something, you have to work with others as a default. So, correct?
Yes, and so people who are attracted to our program, they understand, that we are, a process-driven, research immersive, externally facing profession. That our design is, while we certainly appreciate the value of a good portfolio, there has to be kind of, research and reason behind the decisions that are made. We are differentiated from our School of Art neighbors, that are housed in our same college for a reason. And I think, we're very quick to kind of immerse students in the idea of, that you're designing for others and that you're designing to make an impact in the world, and that requires methods and approaches that get you outside of yourself and even outside of your own context.
Great. Look, unfortunately, our time is up. Professor Hanington, Bruce, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for making the time. Thank you for allowing us to share with your experience. And actually, it's always interesting talking to you. It's very easy talking to you, even by email. You're always willing to help everyone, and for that we are immensely grateful. So can we give Professor Hanington a round of applause? Thank you.